Is that shell shock from yesterday, everyone? Yep.
I actually feel better today.
Do you? That's
Yeah.
good.
I was wondering if there was a way that we could connect with everyone, not using Facebook.
Well, we don't really organise kind of whether you use Facebook or I don't know what's a telegram, whatever the thing is. It's all fraught with problems because
Exactly. That's why I don't want to do Facebook.
yeah, it's fake. It's kind of fake, isn't it? We could do Facebook, yeah, let's call it that.
Yeah, I call it
Yeah.
facade book.
We could just do a
Feed my
little
emotions.
a show of hands where people are from. So if you want to, meet with, it's always best to meet in person.
Yeah.
And you're not obliged to socialise with anyone you meet here, but sometimes you meet people who you think, oh, it would be nice to keep
You've got
in
to bear in
touch.
mind too, at every event we generally have not met or spent a lot of time with people in the event, so we don't know the spiritual or soul. When I say we don't know, we know when we're at the event, obviously, but we don't know what they're going to do with that when they're away from the event. And so sometimes we see people meeting together and then certain people getting bossy or, getting overbearing or, not being humble. And so people want us to sort of set up groups, but at the end of the day, it's not possible for us to ensure that those groups are living harmoniously with what we teach.
Right.
Does that make sense?
And it's also prone to people saying, no, I know, this is divine truth, and I'm giving you all the feedback. And
Yeah.
it's not very...
And usually the more arrogant the person, the more they're prone to do that. And so we would suggest that if you do meet up with people, that you take care initially, because you don't know them either. You don't know their history. You get to know them.
Yeah.
And some people are not as sincere as they may first make out, is our experience.
Maybe we can ask who's from California, and then if you're from California, it's pretty much
Fair portion.
fair portion, yeah?
Okay, so let's break it into areas. San Diego, or the environment.
Like this surrounds.
Yeah. So if you guys just want to stand up so you can see each other, because it's hard to see each other otherwise. So San Diegans.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so you can see who each one of you are. There you go. Okay.
Who's from Los Angeles?
Los Angeles. Those of you from LA.
Okay. Do you know each other already? No?
No?
We met some of us met.
Yes, yeah, okay.
So
Oh, yeah,
LA,
that's you,
yeah.
yes.
And
Where else?
San Francisco area. Just in case. And what have we missed out?
Yeah, where else are you from?
Other states?
Yeah, just
Central Valley, Midwest.
all right, one at a time. Midwest? Okay, Midwest.
When you say Midwest, what are you talking about?
Where is that?
Like Chicago, all the way down the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a long way away from here.
Yeah, but is it just you, Jenny? Of course, you're where are you now?
Utah? You're still in Utah?
So who's from Utah?
Few
Stand up.
There you go. Utah, there you go.
Where are you from, Jenny?
Iowa.
Iowa. Anyone from Iowa?
No.
Just Jenny.
Arizona.
Arizona.
Who's from Arizona?
Yes, so stand up if you're from Arizona.
Okay, a few from Arizona.
Mississippi.
Mississippi?
The only one.
Washington.
Washington, who's Washington?
Nope.
Oregon.
Oregon?
Oregon.
Yeah.
They were related.
Yeah, that's same family. And
What about
Colorado.
Colorado.
Who's Colorado? Stand up,
Oh my
Colorado.
goodness.
Yeah.
You know it. Just like you said, right?
Florida. Anyone from Florida?
Anyone from Florida? Yeah. You're a long way from Florida. Yeah.
From both places.
Yeah.
Canada. Is anyone from Canada? Yeah.
Canadians.
There you go. Canadians. See each Minnesota.
Okay, so there you go. And are you all West Coast Canada?
Calgary, Alberta.
Calgary, Alberta.
West Coast.
West Coast.
West Coast.
Yeah.
West Coast. And Catherine, where are you from?
West Coast.
Yeah, there you go.
So it's easier to get here than it was to get across to Halifax, right?
Yeah, but it was a two days drive coming here.
Ah,
So 13, 14 hours each day.
okay. Yeah,
Anywhere we missed?
Idaho?
Idaho.
Idaho?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not Iowa. Everyone's interested.
Idaho and Minnesota.
Minnesota.
Yeah, are you?
Oh, Minnesota.
Yeah. And Vicky.
And Oklahoma?
Oklahoma.
Regarding California, there was someone over there that said Central Valley, and we're from the Central Valley.
Okay,
Oh, yes,
Central
it's
Valley.
stand
Where's
up
that?
Central Valley?
In California?
No?
We don't
No?
know.
I'm not sure of,
Yeah.
Okay.
Where is Central Valley in California?
Fresno,
Well, that's near Yosemite.
near Yosemite.
Oh, okay. Out near the parks. Yeah.
Right in the
Yeah.
middle.
We want to go there one day.
We do.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, did we miss anywhere?
Las Vegas.
Las
Las
Vegas.
City of
Nevada. Oh, yeah, man.
There
I
are
don't-
most cities are Sin City.
I don't think-
Eric, where are you from?
Marietta, California, just 60 miles north
Yeah.
above San Diego.
And behind you?
Riverside. California. Good, eh? There you go.
Right. Some people are just like.
We're from Australia. Emma's from England.
Yeah, England. Anywhere else?
I'm from New Mexico.
New
New
Mexico.
Mexico.
All right.
Yeah.
Kenya.
Kenya.
Kenya. In the long run.
Yeah, original.
Originally.
Anyone from heaven?
You're all from not here. None of you are human, like earthlings. Earthlings.
Anyone space aliens?
Space. Okay, so next time we come, we probably won't be coming to the West Coast, probably. Because we've just found we've had too many stops on this trip for us to handle on a regular basis every year. So what we're thinking next time is we'll probably break our trip into 4 major stays where we'll go sort of Europe, England, Canada, USA. But probably in the USA, we want to check out the North Carolina and Tennessee area a bit for the next few years, probably. So that's probably for the next few years where we'll have our seminars when we come, which we're planning to do next September. So
Yeah, so if you can make it to the East Coast.
yeah. And it's down there we find things are a little bit easier to get accommodation than we found here, in terms of particularly B&Bs and things like that. And also a bit easier to find, there's more venues. Here there were a lot of venues, but they were way out of our price range.
Although the venues, we've got another venue next weekend.
Yeah.
And we'll see what it's like. It was more reasonably priced.
Yeah,
But
it was still, like this venue was $32.50 US for the 2 days. And the next 2 venue, the next half cycle was 60 venue around about, and it's going to be a squeezy 60 probably. Will be.
Well, it's about half the price.
It was about half the price, about $1,600 or something US for each weekend. So yeah, so the venues on this coast here are pretty pricey, we found. And we looked in LA as well as here, because we have to go home via LA. But it was pretty much the same wherever we looked. Hard to get venues, and also sometimes it's hard to get venues who actually, accept us going there as well. And some venues get a bit problematic when we suggest it, and that there might be media come along and at points and things like that. Some venues get a bit antsy about that. And we've already had one venue quite upset with us about that in Ireland. And this is what happens generally. It's hard to find. It's difficult to find a suitable venue at times. And this kind of venue is quite good because you've got sort of surfaces that are not so hard, and you've got carpeted floors. That means with the sound it's a lot easier to tune it in and get it quite good. So at other venues which are older, which we've had in England and stuff, they're very echoey, and there's a lot of wooden surfaces and wooden walls, and they're quite a lot harder to set up our sound with at times. So yeah, we've already started looking as to where venues and everything for the next trip.
Just out of interest, would you come to North Carolina next year? With show of hands, yeah. Because that just helps with the size.
The size of the venue. Yeah. In the US at the moment, if many of you, how many of you are going to either next week or the weekend after? So yeah,
Half-ish.
more than half probably. Yeah, so we're thinking next time we come, we might have like a 2-day bigger event, and then a 3-day sort of smaller event the week after. So it's immediately the week after. So we're thinking the first event, we'll probably try to get a venue that's around the 200 people, 250 people mark, and then the second venue, try to get something around the 100, 150 mark. And so if people who want to come to both events can come to both events, but if you don't want to come to both events, the first event will be more aimed, the first day will be aimed at people that have never been there before.
And haven't heard much about it.
And the second day will be aimed at more like assistance group type material, and we want to focus probably on sin.
Next year the idea was if we had sort of 5 days in each location, the first day would sort of cover Secrets of the Universe ground. So if you've got friends or family who are a bit new and interested, that's a good day for them to come to. It's also good for you to just get a refresher, reminder of the basics. And then we might focus on sin, which is something we've been focusing a lot on this trip already. But also, what was the other thing that I said? The other
Laws.
Yeah, law and principle, which is another thing we've sort of been touching on. But hopefully, if we have 3 to 4 days really honing in on a topic like that, we try and cover some material before we open up for questions, just so we cover the ground we want to cover. Because often we get a bit diverted by questions, and sometimes that's just based on personal worries or panics, things that people have. There is driving their questions rather than going deeper into the topic. And sometimes when you go deeper into the topic, the panic subsides because you learn more truth and you don't have to worry as much.
So probably the first weekend would be, the first day would be like an introductory thing, and then the second day would be like an introduction to the next 3 days of the following weekend, if that makes sense. So you end up with 4 days on a subject, and 1 day which is just sort of general sort of presentation. So, and we're thinking we'll probably do that in every place we go around the world. But next time we're probably only going to stop 4 times. So we'll go to Portugal in Europe, we'll go to England, and then we'll go to Canada, probably on the east coast again, and then down in North Carolina is what we're thinking. Because this trip we've just had way too many stops, and what happens is we waste too many days as well. When you're stopping 15 times, you're wasting basically 30 days with travel and setups and everything. So you end up wasting, off the 4 months, you end up wasting a whole month just in terms of travel and so what we want to do is change that a bit so we're not wasting so much time, and also so it's not so grueling on us, because generally when we've got 3-day events, which most of our events have been, you've got a setup day, so there's 4 days for us, there's 4-day events, and then you've got travel day and the setup day in terms of getting food and everything else you need to get, And so we end up with one day where we've got a break. And if something goes wrong, then that day is written off as well. So we've had a fair few things in the Strip go wrong as well, where we've had to change flights and change accommodation and be blocked from having flights, and when we rock up for a flight and all these kind of things. And by the time you add up all of that, you get no days off basically after that. So we've got to change that for our next trip. Yeah. Anyway, that's
Enough about that.
enough about the practicalities. Any questions?
Just real quick, are you doing anything in Australia? Or
Yeah, we are. We for the last 8 years we've run 2 events a week in Australia. We have recordings of most of them, but we don't have the time to edit them and get them out. So because we're doing so many other things in Australia, so there's actually a huge backlog of material that's almost 7 years of material now. And the last 4 years we've been running at least on the average one event every weekend.
I guess some people have found them on Spotify, is it?
Yeah.
Have people been
Bootleg copies have been
bootlegs?
circulating.
Yeah, so I guess if you search Divine Truth on Spotify, you're going to find a big long playlist of just people's mobile phone recordings of discussions that we've had. Yeah, so
no assistant groups?
no,
Okay.
we would like to do assistance groups. Yeah.
But that hasn't been. We've been focused on trying to get the God's Way organisation up and running in Australia as well, and to get it to a stage where we can leave for 4 months and know that everything is going to be running the way we want it to run. So the God's Way organisation is a non-profit that's running in Australia. It owns around 1,000 acres of property. So it owns around 1,000. So maybe if we just write down some website addresses for you so you can look at these things. So the God's Way stuff is all on godsway.net is the... Right, and there, if you subscribe to godsway.net, you'll actually get regular updates of what's happening every month around about. I think they're updating.
Yeah. Oh no, every quarter.
Every quarter, sorry, they're updating things, so you get a bit of a picture. Although no, there's more than that, because they're also putting updates of the work, and that happens once a month as well. So they have financial updates every quarter, but they usually update other things once a month at least. So you end up with the sort of knowing what's going on with what we're doing in Australia. So at the moment, they're actually building a water collection shed, and Mary and I are giving our goal is to give our property to God's Way in Australia, so that the property we own, on that property, they're building a watershed, and our intention is that property will become the God's Way office in Australia, basically. So Mary and I need to we're going to have to build a place or find a place to live. So there is our plan, we've been saving up for 12 years, our plan is to try to build a place on the property that we're giving to God's Way, that eventually, if we're not using it, other people can use it.
Because we want to travel more, because we feel like there's value in meeting you guys face to face.
Yeah.
Giving you the opportunity to sort of meet you where you're at and give you feedback where you're at, rather than when you're just watching something on YouTube. That's not, you've got to be pretty self-aware to know what applies to you, don't you? Yeah. And often, because your sin and your facade wants to go, oh no, that doesn't apply, this thing does.
Most of it doesn't apply to me, right?
Or it's this thing and it's actually the opposite thing.
It applies to my husband.
Yeah. You should listen to this, dear. Yeah, so because we want to travel 4 to 6 months of the year, we figure it's pointless. We don't need a big home. We don't have a big home at the moment, but also it makes good sense for our current home to be used as an office, because it's right next to our recording studio, so God's Way can use that office and studio space while we're travelling. And then we just need somewhere to stay when we're home for 6 months of the year. So that's our plan.
We're home about 5 to 6 months of the year, because 2 months of the year we're also intending to travel around Australia and doing the same thing. So yes, there are other events around Australia,
that we're planning.
that we're planning. And at this stage, a lot of them are just weekend visits to different places. And in terms of the assistance group format, we're hoping next year there'll be sort of one in every continent that we visit. So in Australia and also in Portugal, in England and Canada and here.
So yeah, we did that assistance group in 2019, the Understanding Sin and Its Causes, but there was a lot of problems with the recordings. But we're thinking next year if we come and do this trip, which this looks like we will, then we could present that information in each continent. So it gives people the opportunity to engage with that.
Yeah.
Because we do feel it's very topical. Everywhere we've been, it's really where people need to learn the most about their sin and the impact of their sin and where it comes from and what it is.
And how it blocks a relationship with God, how it stops you from having a proper relationship with God. Yeah.
So we will ask next year, if you're coming, if you want to engage with that material, then you would need to come to 4 days so that you can follow the material. That's why we ask people to attend for the full program, so that you can learn with the material as it's presented. When people come for just one day or another, then they ask a question that's already been covered, or sort of not respectful to us or to the other people who are present, who are attending the whole time.
Yeah. We're not sure what to do either about the whole situation where a lot of people who are booking are not coming. Obviously when it's a free event, there's no penalty for not coming, so people just don't come. So here we've had 50 people, I think it's 49 or 47, not come.
Yeah, and because so many were booked, I hired a big room, and we could have done with a smaller room. It would have sort of halved our costs.
Yeah.
So it's a tricky thing for us to.
Yeah.
I thought about that last night. What about a refundable deposit? If you come, you would get a refund.
Yeah, we don't want to do that.
I see.
We don't want to take people's money for not coming and all that kind of stuff. And also, we don't want to do it for a number of other reasons too, because it actually means more management from our perspective, and it's already quite tough. Because Mary and I do everything. There's no one helping us currently to do any of the things, including set up all the venues, aside from the people in the location. So
that we mentioned.
the people we mentioned yesterday. And to be honest, we do the majority of the work because we've got to do all the negotiation with the venues and all those other things. Mary has done most of that for this trip, for all of our trip. And so it's a lot of work, and if we add more work to it, it's just, if you get to the stage where we've got to manage individual people's bookings, it's really, for 1,000 people, it's hard. And particularly when you're travelling, it's hard. Because, like some places we don't have good internet when we're travelling, like Portugal and stuff like that, we didn't have hardly any internet at all. And so it's impossible to sort of manage these things.
And also, it's a very strong value in us that it should be free to anyone.
Yeah.
And even, because I thought about that exact idea, but then you have to have $50 up front. And what if you don't have that $50?
Yeah.
I don't want you to be
precluded just because you don't have any money.
And also we do have kind of another value, which is that we want people to love, not because they want to, not because there's a penalty for not loving, because then that's not love. If you're just doing it because you might lose $50, then that's not actually you wanting to love.
Yeah. We feel if the person doesn't want to come, then they shouldn't come. It would be nice if they didn't book in the first place.
And if they took their booking more seriously because there was $50 involved, then, if you love, you take your booking seriously because you value the time and effort of everyone who's involved. And
so don't book if you think you might make it. It has to be a bigger commitment to that than that. Because we need to know you're going to make it. And, we've only had one venue where everybody came in this trip. And on the average, we've had 30% of people not come. So that's quite a lot of people not come. And a lot of it's because they're free events, of course. And so people just feel like, oh, well, I can book and get a place, and then if I want to cancel it any time I can. But that's not a very loving thing to do, particularly when we're limited with size. If we were unlimited, if we just could rock up somewhere where there's a big stadium or something, and if 20 people come, that's okay, but if 1,000 people come, that's okay too, then we wouldn't do bookings at all, to be honest. We'd just say we're going here then. And that's where we want to head. We want to actually head to the place where we don't even have bookings. You could just come. And we just rely on the fact that donations are enough to cover whatever the higher costs were. On this trip, it's been difficult at times because, you know, in some places without the donation of 1 or 2 people, we wouldn't have gone anywhere near covering a lot of the expenses of the trip. But we also don't want to advertise what our costs are either to you know, we don't want to get into this thing where every seminar we have to write down all of our expenses to run that seminar so that it encourages people to donate.
Because again, that's...
Because that, to us, is not a gift anymore.
Yeah.
So we want to give you the gift, and if we have the means to do so, we will. If we don't have the means to do so, then we won't. And in fact, in the past, one of the reasons why we haven't travelled very much is because we just didn't have the means to do so. You know, it's expensive travelling. You know, so, and Mary and I, you know, we own our own property, but we live on about $1,500 a month, and you know, that's Australian dollars as well. We pay ourselves $1,500 a month each. So that's Australian dollars. So that's what US is about $2,000 a month, I suppose. Yeah.
Total.
$1,000 would buy you 1,500 Australian.
Yeah.
So 3,000 Australian is
Oh, sorry. I thought you were saying
Oh.
1,500 is 2,000.
No, 2,000 US, but that's our whole budget. And then everything else just goes on paying for things, you know. And if we've got any excess, we put it towards God's Way or trips to do trips. But if we're not doing trips, you'll understand that's why we're not doing them. We just don't have enough money to do it.
Maybe you could charge $500 for an hour.
To be honest, Stephen, you guys can't pay me for my time. I'm priceless. And the truth itself is priceless.
I feel so sad when I hear that's happening in the world, that it's such an elitist thing, and it's so opposed.
Well, it's only people who don't share truth who do that.
Yeah, because if you have truth, you don't want to hold it back from anyone, you know, and you feel everyone as your brother and sister equal, you know, there's no hierarchy in that sense.
So we feel everything will be driven by desire, by people's desire. And if the desire isn't strong, then of course, Mary and I, we're not like world travellers. We've spent 2,000 years looking at the Earth's surface. We've seen every place. You know what I mean? And
we're not sightseers.
We're not sightseers. And the sights we see in the spirit world are far much more interesting than the sights here. So our primary focus is to get enough time where we can grow ourselves and continue that, but also to share truth with others. That's our primary purpose. So sharing truth with others isn't our primary purpose for being here. Our primary purpose for being here is firstly to demonstrate what growth looks like, and so that you develop some faith that you can grow too using the same methods. So that's important. And then one of the other reasons for being here was to also be able to help a lot of spirits. So we want to do that a bit today. I know some of you get a bit bored with that, but we don't. And also it's really good for them to have that assistance, because it's sometimes difficult, as a celestial spirit, it's sometimes difficult to help spirits in different places from the celestial heavens without there being a point of contact, and often the point of contact is here on earth. So we're very happy that we have that opportunity. And then thirdly, we want to share the truth with others as much as we're able while we're here. And so that's our main goals really. And our personal goals are just to keep growing towards God and keep growing towards each other. And at the moment growing towards our own soul, because our own soul is in the Union State. And we, as Alan Miller and Mary Luck, which is our names in this life, we are still getting rid of the intellect. So as we get rid of that, we'll grow more and more towards our soul. And at some point we hope, and it's an experiment so we don't know, but we hope that we'll make that transition into just being in the soul rather than being so Alan Miller anymore or Mary Luck anymore. You know? So that's where we're headed, and that's what we're doing. But they're the main goals for us at the moment. So when it comes, people ask us when we travel, oh, did you get to see anything, you know, whatever. Generally not, you know. Generally, most of the time when we go and see someplace, it's more from a point of view of having a chance to spend a bit of time in nature or to get a bit of exercise or that kind of thing, more than needing to sort of visit places of interest. Although that being said, every country has some interesting places, and so it's interesting to go there, but unfortunately on Earth now, there's hard to find an area on Earth that's not damaged by humans. And so, you know, one of the things when we do go to different places, we feel quite strongly, wow, it's pretty damaged here, you know, wow. And it's a bit of a shock sometimes how damaged, you know. Places that people think are pristine, and they are so badly damaged. It's, in terms of what they were even 1,000 years ago. Because of course we visited a lot of these places, not because of the places to visit, but more because of the people there we were trying to connect with. But over the course of, at the time we've been alive, and been self-aware, you could say, from the last 2,000 years, we've visited a lot of places on Earth, and now when you compare what they looked like then and what they look like now, it's just like totally different. And you know, it's quite amazing what modern society does to an environment, and something we've got to learn to change. If we don't, we're going to end up destroying our own survivability on Earth. All right, so that's our plan.
So
is there any
I
questions about?
I just want to let people know.
This event.
If you, so Australia or overseas, this is where you'll register for events, which is event.divinetruth.com,
Yep.
which you probably use to register for this event.
Yep.
Also, I want to let you know that the website was getting a beautiful upgrade, but unfortunately Kate, who was working with Jesus, passed, and as a result the work on that has stopped. They've done some really nice work in modernising the look and feel, but also creating a back-end database that was searchable, so that if you wanted to look up any topic, you could put that into the search engine and it would bring back any transcript, any video, any audio that mentioned those things and a time code. Unfortunately, it's at a standstill at the moment until we find someone else who has the same desire as Kate and the same skills. So in the meantime, mary.divinetruth.com is where...
I do update the website occasionally still.
But I will announce here if that has happened. Yeah. So that's sort of our news, what we're up to, that kind of thing at mary.divinetruth.com. And that is a blog technically still, so you can subscribe just like you subscribe to God's Way, and you get an email whenever we change something. So just FYI, there's some, that's how you find out about us.
Yeah. Microphone, please.
Yeah.
Thanks, sir.
Hi, I know that you want to focus mostly on Western countries because they do a lot of harm on the earth.
Yep.
But what are some blocks to Asian and African countries at this time visiting?
The main block is language. So there's a lot of people we feel would be interested in Divine Truth, But until we can speak those languages, which I feel we'll probably be able to do in the future, but until we can, it's going to be hard to share it because many of them don't understand English, of course. So the first block is language. The second one is interest. Most of them are, they are struggling to make ends meet in their day-to-day life. The third one is that many of them are in better condition than people in the West. So in some ways, they don't need our help as much as people in the West do currently. So there's a number of things. We hope that'll improve over time. And there are people who are contacting us from these countries. And we have also already visited like Brazil and other countries. But the amount of spirit influence as well is quite great in these kind of countries. So, and they are more open to that influence as well. So that means if people don't want to hear the truth from us, the spirits don't want them to, and quite frequently they don't, as a result of their codependence with the spirits they are with. So there are a number of factors as to why it's quite slow growth, but also it's just a lot to do with the fact that the people we do share truth with are growing very slowly as well, because most people don't really grasp divine truth at a soul level. They're only grasping it at an intellectual level, and that's for the most part because they're unwilling to work through their sin at a soul level. And so that there is quite a number of factors as to why things are not really improving, even in Western countries, to be honest with you. Most places we go to, we end up meeting a new group of people. It's rare to meet people that we've met before, and people listen for a while, and then when they get some direct feedback from us, or their life sort of catches up with them, generally they stop listening, and then they don't listen anymore. So we've shared divine truth with hundreds of thousands of people, and we don't see many of them ever again, for all sorts of reasons. So to find people that are really sincere who can help the sharing is one purpose for this trip, actually. And so that we can find people who are actually going to be sincere and really do want their relationship with God, and really do want to deal with their sin, and really do want to follow God's laws, and really do want to make changes in their life. Those kind of people are going to be, in the future, like precious in terms of helping others. And, we find that it's quite hard to find people who are that sincere. In fact, one of the topics I want to talk about and wanted to talk about on this trip was sincerity itself. Like, how do you measure your own sincerity, and how do you develop your own sincerity? What does it mean to be sincere? And we might do that actually next weekend or the weekend after, or both.
But, if we heard from someone in one of those continents and they were keen, I'd do what I could to get us there. That's really how we've come to each place we've been to on this trip. Someone in each, just usually one person in each location.
Of course, it would have to be subsidised by other people in the West, because they can't afford to get us there, and we can't afford to go. So, and what we find is people in the West are quite self-absorbed. When you're going to their location, they will donate something towards everything. But when you go to some other location that they're not going to benefit from, most people in the West won't donate towards it. So you end up with this sort of problem where, the people who are poor you can't visit because we are not rich ourselves, so and so you end up in this sort of cycle where you can't necessarily help the people who are poor, but the people who could help the people who are poor are the people who are more well off in the more well off countries, but most of them are more self-absorbed, and it's only when you go there that they'll donate towards something to do with what we do. So for the most part, I think if you look at how many subscribers we have on YouTube, which is very little, there's about I think it's 10,000 or something like that. I haven't checked recently, but of those 10,000, maybe 100 regularly donate. So what's that about percentage? 0.1% people donate. And this is the difficulty in a modern world with how much focus there is on money of being able to share things for free. It's quite difficult. And every place, like everything that we're using to help share it for free, we have to pay for it. So it's like, at the moment, you know, there's very few things that happen where an auditorium is gifted or something like that, or you know, some people are privately gifting us their homes when we travel, which has been saved us quite significant funds. So just to give you an idea, to stay here in San Diego cost us 11,000 Australian dollars for the 3 weeks. In you know, in North Carolina, Patty loaned us. She moved out of her house, and she gave us her house for 2 weeks. So that basically saved us 7,000 Australian dollars. Just right there. And then when we're in we need a big enough vehicle, of course, to carry all our gear. You know, so that's. But when we were in Nova Scotia, a lady lent us her car for the whole time we were there. We were there 3 weeks, and normally that would cost us like anywhere up to like, you know, $9,000 or whatever more. Particularly for the size of the vehicle we need to carry.
Not 9,000.
No, about 1,000. About 1,000 US. And so every little bit of those things helps, but sometimes people will lounge the car thinking it's a good thing, but their car's almost a wreck. And we, you know, in one case
we had to get some repairs
go and get some repairs done. Which we paid for to get before we used the car. That was in England. But, and so, you know, people think they're doing you a favour, but it turns out sometimes we had to walk out, you know, take the car to a service station. But, you know, so it's not always easy to set up an event when you're trying to do everything for free. And that's just something to bear in mind, even if you think about how people in the world treat free things. It's really interesting because we get to see it all the time, but the average attitude is, oh, it's free, so I can book in and cancel whenever I want, it doesn't matter to me. But they're not thinking of the cost to the people organising the event for free. And there's a lot of unloving behaviour towards people doing things for free. And it's like, oh, free food, oh, let's get twice as much. You know, than we would normally get. That kind of attitude is common. So if there's a free, you know, service, oh, well, let's go and get it more often than we would normally get that service. You know, people have this sort of attitude, if it's for free, then let's abuse it. And this is also one reason why in the world there's very little that's offered for free anymore. Because most people find that who do offer things for free initially, you know, they end up it's being abused in one way or the other. So you look at things like Wikipedia, you know, they're constantly sending out messages now to raise donations because it's very costly for them to provide that service for free. A lot of people in the world use it, but very few people contemplate donating towards it. And we use another service for our service called Let's Encrypt, which is an encryption service to allow for what are called SSL certificates for our websites. And, you know, they're having the same problem. They run that for free. It's a non-profit based in the US, and they're running it for free, but very few people donate to them. And so they're having trouble raising the funds to continue their free service. Because people think, oh, it's free, so they forget about the fact that it's costing them. So like we use that service and we donate a regular couple of $100 a year to them as well, because it's sort of like, we know from our own experience it's not free for them to do what they do. You know? And yeah, so, you know, the general attitude most of the world has towards a gift is to abuse it. And this is why less and less people give gifts, because generally every time they have given a gift it gets abused, and so they stop giving gifts. But we don't want to do that, so we want to continue giving gifts, and we'll do what we can given the circumstances we have.
Amen. Thank you.
Yeah. But we're not going to pressure people to raise funds. We're not going to send out donation things like Wikipedia do. We're not going to, inform people about the costs of events in a formal way just to raise funds and to encourage you to donate. We're not going to do any of that. So if we just can't do something, we just don't do it.
The irony is we cop a lot of flack for the way we do things, but we don't do all these emotionally manipulative things that are very accepted on Earth.
Yeah.
But if I mention donations, we get,
We
the
get a lot of
media picks
abusive
up on
emails
it.
about it.
In Ireland, I've written that blog post that some of you saw where I said, we need to cover our funds, to cover our costs. We need enough funds to cover the cost of the trip. Yep, they printed that, like we're exploiting you poor people for money, and yet we don't employ a lot of the emotionally manipulative techniques that are very commonplace on Earth today. So,
So whenever you're using something for free, and this doesn't just apply to us, it applies to everything you use that's for free, consider the people who have arranged that as a part of your consideration. It's an act of love for you to consider that, if you abuse a service that's free, then sooner or later they won't be able to provide it for free. So think about that, feel about that, and work your way through the emotions that cause you to feel that way. That's the way to go. And if you do that, you'll find that more things in the world will be available to you for free as a result of your appreciation for those things. So whenever we see things for free, like we've got servers obviously in Australia and around the world. At the moment I'm looking at after around 20 of them. And all of them have Linux software that's all for free. And so we try to participate in the creation of that software, and we also donate towards the suppliers of these particular software. They all have donation, ability to donate towards them. And when you compare a big entity like Microsoft, which is, global money-making machine, you could basically call it, and then you compare it with like the suppliers of Linux we use, Debian and Proxmox, and when you compare those products, they're really fantastic products, the public domain products, and yet they're being provided for free. There's a lot of effort that people put in just doing those things for free. And so, we really appreciate that effort, and that's why we contribute to those things as well. So just bear that in mind when you're using things yourself. An act of love is to appreciate a gift. Any other questions about side?
And on this side, Tyson, who's got the mic on this side? Just keep your hand up, Tyson.
It may be a little off topic, but when you mentioned growth, I was just wondering how we measure growth. Oftentimes I hear you saying, we're in the second or first or fifth or whatever sphere condition.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, is that part of the awareness that you develop, or how do you know which sphere?
I think it was, a good question perhaps for next weekend, but let's, in terms of soul condition, God's laws measure your condition. Anybody who receives God's love grows quite rapidly. And also makes changes in their life that match their growth. Right? So they don't ever stay in the same life. To be blunt with all of you, there's nobody here who is not in the first sphere. In other words, all of you are in the first sphere of the spirit world, in terms of your condition. Right? Now, that's not something to punish yourself about, but it's to look at. The main reason why you are, there's two main reasons. The first one is that you're not looking at your sin. So you don't want to address your sins. That's one of the first reasons why it's like that. And the sins make you insincere when it comes to receiving God's love. So what happens is you can't receive love from God while you're in a state of insincerity. A sincere prayer is a sincere longing or desire to receive that love. And so if you receive that love, or desire to receive it, and the desire is sincere, you will receive it every time you ask. But God wants to give it to you every time you ask, but it has to be sincere. The law that calls the Holy Spirit, which is the conduit between you and God, to you, is actually controlled by your sincerity. Right? Now, your sincerity, when you're in a state of sin, is not there. For the most part, you do all sorts of things that are out of harmony with love, not seeing the importance of dealing with those things so that you can become more sincere. So the very first reason why the majority of people don't grow is because they're unwilling to deal with their lack of sincerity, which is caused by their addictions and which are their sins. So your addictions are sins. They are against the laws of God, and therefore they are sins. They're against the laws of love, so they are sins. So very important to deal with the sins. So what happens a lot of times when a person first approaches God, they have moments of sincerity and they do receive some love. But after they have received some, they continue to believe that they can continue to receive them without changing their level of sincerity. Right? And that God's laws do not respond to that. So the key is, how do I become sincere? And how I become sincere is dealing with all of my addictions that make me insincere, right? Or you could say it another way, dealing with all of my sins. They make me insincere. All the ways in which I want to sin. Not by mistake. Many of you believe your sins are by mistake. No, most of them are not. They are purposeful. They are taken actions you take on purpose because you like to get the results. You feel the results are worthy. Right? So one of the biggest reasons for our trip, this trip, has been to address this issue in the West in particular, that everybody wants to continue their sins, one way or the other. And it's very, very difficult to convince people who are in sin that actually that sin is preventing them from receiving more love. Right? They sort of have the concept, the average person on earth has the concept, if God loved me, he wouldn't require anything else from me other than to love me. Right? In other words, I can sort of be demanding, and I can be ridiculing of God sometimes, and I can be blasphemous towards God sometimes, and I can be treat people badly, in my life, and God should still love me. Right? If God really loved me, that's what he would do. Right? And God, of course, loves you in a general way when you do all of those things, but in terms of a personal relationship with God, no, you're not going to receive love while you have those attitudes. It's very important to understand that, right? That love, the personal relationship with God, most of us are offending God. It's like, when I say offending, I don't mean that God takes offense, but we are blaspheming his nature by believing. And this is why one of the things I want to talk about with you today is, what do you believe about God, right? Because it's very important to understand that your beliefs about God are affecting your ability to receive love from God. Yeah. And many of you believe that God should be like a parent who tolerates your bad behaviour. And God isn't like that. God's a loving parent. A parent who's, the average parent on earth tolerates bad behaviour from their children, but that's not a loving parent. From God's perspective, that's unloving. And a loving parent corrects bad behaviour. Right? And that's what God does. So when we engage bad behaviour, we can't expect God to go, oh, it's all good. What you're doing is all good. We can't expect that. And so therefore, when it comes to a personal relationship with God, the main reason why many of us don't progress after firstly receiving a bit of love is because we continue to be insincere about our sin. And that's why Mary and I in this trip have spent a lot of time talking to people about their sin. in Austria, we talked about the battle that people have going on inside of their soul, right? The battle and the fight with God, you know, the fight against God's laws, which is why we said we're fighting against the law of love. And we, you know, when we were in Portugal, we tried to continue the same thing, but it was very hard given the circumstances there and the spirits involved. But when we got to England, we tried to do the same thing. We started, you know, trying to focus on that discussion. We continued that in Ireland and in Canada as well. And so if you think about all of the things that we discussed on this trip, a lot of it has been about just trying to help people come to realise not to pick on yourselves and not to get down about yourselves, but go, yeah, unless I'm prepared to deal with my sin, the things that I do that are out of harmony with love that I want to do, unless I'm prepared to do that, my desire for God's love is insincere. And if my desire for God's love is insincere, God cannot give it to me, right? The law precludes it coming to me. But as soon as I have a moment of sincerity and I ask, God will give you love. He will do that every single time. Every single time you have a moment of sincerity, you will receive love when you ask for it. And this is the other thing most of us don't do. Is we don't trust that when we're not receiving that love, it's because of our lack of sincerity. We think it's some other reason, some other magical thing has happened, and you know, there must be, you know, some other reason why this is happening. And then, of course, we become very prone to spirit influence because we're not receiving love from God. And so what we do then is we go, oh, but I still want love from somebody. And our definition of love is meet my addictions. And so a spirit who wants a codependence with you meets that addiction and you feel loved. And what ends up happening then is there's a build-up of more spirit-based interaction because you think that spirit is God giving you love. But actually it's not God giving you love at all. It's a spirit meeting your addictions and making you feel all nice and warm and fuzzy about having those addictions because that spirit wants you to have the addictions because it gives them a feeling they have power, control and other things that they then get out of that. So if you look at the Paget messages and the prayer, you can see in the bottom section of the prayer, there was a whole reference. Actually, I think I have the Paget messages here. Just I'd like to read it to you, just so that you understand that this has all been said in the Paget messages. All of this, all of what I'm saying to you with regard to prayer and sincerity, it's all being said there one way or the other, right? And so, any of you who have not read it, I recommend you do. But in the Paget messages, down the bottom of it, it says, keep us in the shadow of your love every hour and moment of our lives, and help us to overcome all temptations of the flesh. They're your addictions. You understand? And the influence of the powers of the evil ones. They're the spirits you're attracting because of your addictions. Right? Which so constantly surround us and endeavour to turn our thoughts away from God to the pleasures and allurements of the world. The pleasures and allurements of the world are the things you want from the world. Right? So even in the prayer that was mentioned in the Paget messages, there's constant references to your addictions, your desire. Well, it calls them your desires, but they're desires that are out of harmony with love, which are addictions. And the temptation only comes, the temptation from spirits, only comes when you're unwilling to deal with your own addictions. Right? So if you're unwilling, this creates a dynamic where spirits, in particular, who are willing to satisfy your addictions, can come in the place of God. And there's so many spirits doing this. And we meet people all the time who say, oh, I've received love from God, and they've never received love from God. They've received like what I would call codependent, addictive emotions from spirits and because those spirits have more powerful emotions than they themselves have, they then interpret That is the emotion coming from God. And so they then feel approval for their sin. Now, God will never approve of your sin, ever. He doesn't approve of your sin. Your sin is an evil creation of yours. That's how God sees it. It's creating a lot of pain and suffering on earth. It destroys happiness. That's how God sees it. And so God is never going to approve of your sin. Ever. Ever. Approve. God's created laws, like the law of compensation, the law of reparation, which are purposely there to force you into a state of repenting for your sins at some point. Right? And when I say repenting, forgiveness happens when you forget even your desire to sin anymore. Right? And you no longer have a desire to sin anymore. Now, you can achieve that with God's help, or you can do that even by yourself. That's how people become the perfect natural man, by working through compensation issues and repairing the damage of their sin. Unless you're prepared to emotionally remove your sin from your life, and when I say emotionally, it has to start, obviously, it's going to be an emotional beliefs inside of you that have to come out of you, and you're going to have to work through them. And when I say work through them, you're going to have to feel the pain and suffering of them to work through them. You're going to have to. That's how you do it. And the average person, particularly in Western society, doesn't even want to hear that. They want to hear, I want God to be like my mum and daddy, who every time I got myself in a bind, they come and rescue me. And the only time many people approach God is when they're in a bind. Which is not sincere, is it? Because if you're not in a bind and you don't approach God, but when you're in a bind, you approach God, doesn't that mean that you're basically insincere? Like, you don't really want a relationship with God all the time. You only want it when you want to get helped out, right? So
when
that's
the addictions aren't working anymore.
When the addictions aren't working anymore. They cause too much pain for your life. And so, you don't want things then. And so this is in answer to your question, Si, the sin that we have is the biggest problem we have in terms of constantly receiving love from God. Now, when I say the biggest, it causes a lack of sincerity, but it also causes a lack of faith. Right? Sin is such that it creates faith in itself. So in other words, when you have a sin, you think that sin is going to bring you the happiness you desire. You believe the sin will result in the happiness.
Like corrupt faith.
And that's a corrupt faith, right? So there's a corruption of faith. And in that moment, of course, because your faith is corrupted, you don't even understand that, I need to develop a faith to deal with my sin. Most of us have a faith in our sin rather than a faith to remove it. Yeah. So that's a big problem that we face collectively on earth. Like, the sin is our creation. God will not remove it. He will not remove it. Now, there are certain circumstances where God will remove its cause, but he will also never remove the effect of sin. The effect of sin is pain and suffering, and we've created it. Right? So every tiny little bit of pain and suffering in our lives is created by the sin. So that includes every physical pain that we have, it includes every emotional pain we have, it includes every spiritual pain we have, every sexual pain we have. They are all the results of our own choice to sin. And unless we see it as our own creation that we're responsible for removing, we are never going to make any real growth in our lives. Now, how long that takes, well, is really about how long it takes, isn't it, for you to come to terms with that truth. So on earth there is this very strong momentum towards anarchy with regard to law. And you can see it everywhere, isn't it? So if you compare like even just 100 years ago with now, now people are thinking, my body doesn't even have the genitalia that matches how I feel, so I'm going to get an operation and change the genitalia. Right? That's how strongly we are moving towards this idea and concept, rather than seeing that that's caused by other problems, by different problems that are occurring, particularly with spirit influence. The average person doesn't see it in that place, and so we're going so strongly in this direction where there is no, and we look at sexual sin, there is no boundaries. When I say boundaries, there's no loving boundaries, hardly anymore, with regard to sexual morality. There's also no loving boundaries with regard to what science does in our lives. You know, there's no loving boundaries with regard to how we're destroying the environment. Before, hundreds of years ago, there were limits placed because of practicalities, right? So an example of that was, you know, there were no bulldozers. So, you know, if you had to rip out a tree by hand, it's a lot harder to do than bulldozing it down with a bulldozer, right? And so, you know, you think one person in a bulldozer nowadays can destroy hundreds of acres of property in a day. In Australia, in the state where we live, which is Queensland, we have the largest clearing of any place in the world. Right?
Clearing rate.
Clearing rate. And the main reason why is because we've got all this machinery that the average person before, they'd have to cut down a tree, now they can just go through with a bulldozer. Just a couple of bulldozers with a chain and you can get rid of acres and acres of stuff. And in my childhood, I watched some big, huge bulldozers go through hundreds and hundreds of acres of land, pulling out every single thing that was there and piling it up into a pile and burning it, right? And this is happening all over the world, right? And then we say, oh, there's not much left of the environment. Well, of course there's not. There's our sin, you know? And we're not considering the plants, the variety of plants, the animals, the birds, the creatures, the insects, we're not considering all of these things in our life because we don't even care about them. And it's interesting because we don't even understand how they are actually creating our life. You know, when it comes to insects, for example, most of us don't get that unless there's insects, we're all dead on this planet. Insects are like a major cause of variety and pollination, food source, waste management, all sorts of things they handle. And without them, our Earth would be a devastated wasteland, right? Given the amount of damage we do to it. And so most of us have no idea what we're doing day to day in terms of how we're sinning against the environment or against ourselves or against God's laws or against love. And then this is a problem that we need to address. And so that's why on this trip, you know, I know we've made a bit of fun with it, but, you know, about wiping your bottom with toilet paper and, you know, having pets and all these other things, you know, that we've talked about. Most people still have coffee and tea and chocolate and, you know, we've talked about a lot of things where sin is being imbibed on a physical level. Because we're finding that even, like, it's difficult even on a physical level. Most people want to argue about their sin, you know.
And the physical sins are not the most...
They're not the big sins.
Yeah, they're not the things preventing your relationship with God the most, you know.
No.
That's the emotional and spiritual sins that you're fighting for.
They're the worst. They have the biggest impact. But we can't even talk about the physical ones without everyone getting argumentative. You know what I mean? So this shows you that we're on Earth. There's barely anyone who's willing to address their sin. Barely anyone. And as a result, there's barely anyone who receives God's love. You know, I think in the we talked about condition in Austria. I think somebody asked about how many people would be in the second sphere or something like that. And I think in the whole of the country of Austria, I think our spirit friend said there was 16 people in the second sphere. And they were all on the natural love path. None of them were on the divine love path. Okay. So it's sort of like you multiply that by the world. There's hardly anybody on Earth who's even in the second sphere. That's why the majority of people pass into the house. Get your hand up. Titus.
Oh, just a suggestion about booking. What if you had a requirement or a strong recommendation that people don't book a seminar ticket unless they've already booked their hotel and plane?
Again, it's like
Telling people how to love.
telling people how to love. But yeah, I think
Well,
in one of the might be the email I sent you guys, I said like if you haven't booked your accommodation and the flights,
Then cancel.
then cancel your ticket.
Yeah.
You know, because a lot of people just leave their flights to the day before, like booking, and a lot of people have sort of, it's not
But again, see, if the heart was different, like, can you see, if their feeling was appreciating something that's free and also appreciating the value of truth, these things wouldn't happen, right?
You'd be onto it, wouldn't you?
You'd be onto it, wouldn't you?
Straight away.
Yeah, because you think, oh, it's so important that I learn more about this, you follow? So you'd be onto it, you'd want to do the right thing, the loving thing. That makes sense?
Yeah. We don't want to nurse people either. This is another thing, you know, people want.
So in the future, we may say that, you know,
Yep,
Mary
definitely.
may put it in the event, you know,
We
page.
talk about the principles
But
of love.
even most people, Mary's found, don't even read the page. Like,
People
so Mary's
email
put
me
it-
saying, oh, what's the address, or what time are we starting? It's all mentioned.
Right,
Yeah.
So I'm encouraging Mary not to answer any emails at all about the event. Because most of the time we've organised them well enough to not have to address any of those things.
Well, we put a lot of effort in at the beginning to
Yeah.
try to answer everyone's questions,
Yeah.
so that it would be less maintenance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we don't want to nurse people into a condition of love.
Yeah.
If I did that, I'd be a cult leader.
Sort of recommended. You know, there's a difference between teaching and nursing, and responding and nursing, and
We're just here to teach you what love is, and to teach you what's happening with regard to sin in your life and how that makes you unloving. But we're not here to police your life, to control what you do, make what decisions you make with your life. If you ask us personally, and we ever get the opportunity to talk to any of you personally about your life, there's times we'll make, you know, straight out recommendation about this is love, this isn't love. You know, that's fine. But we're not going to wait around 6 months and then see whether you followed our advice or anything like that.
I'm not going to call you up and go, "Pat, what are you doing?"
Yeah. Have you made this change in your life? That kind of
I'll give you my phone number.
We definitely don't want it. You know, we don't want to do any of these things because it would be unloving for us to do that. And so what we want to do is just share truth with you and then let you make the choices and decisions that you want to make, which will be proof of your sincerity or your lack of it in your relationship with God.
Yeah, and Tyson, I think we're demonstrating the example of what we mean by we gave people a lot of information, we gave people a lot of opportunity, and then when they didn't love, we speak about that. So it's like responding to where people are at, helping people educate. Whereas if I had nursed everyone, I've written, you better book your accommodation, have you done the thing, and all of that. It's almost like then everybody gets here and they think, oh, I've sorted it out, but they wouldn't have naturally done those things. So we want to help people to see where they're actually at in terms of their condition and their love. It's not as a shaming thing, it's not as a blaming thing, it's not as a, you know, oh, you're naughty thing. It's more like, hey, let's look at what happened here.
Let's be real.
Let's be real. This is where you're at. Here's some things to work on. Whereas if we try to manipulate people's behaviour in any way, which I think nursing is manipulating.
Well, it's about manipulation of addiction, isn't it?
Manipulation of addiction, manipulation of will.
So we make you all feel good about yourselves and then you can't.
Yeah. Or if I'm your mummy and I go, how you doing? Hey, make sure you, all that sort of thing, and everyone goes, oh yes, this
they're
Mary's
really
lovely.
interested in me,
Yes.
so I'll come.
Yes.
You know, that kind of thing.
That kind of
we
thing.
don't want to do any of that.
Then it helps the people skip over where they're actually at in terms of love.
Yep.
And it also, and then when we try and point out where you're at with love, it's like, oh no, but I'm here, I got here on time, but it's not a natural state, it's not a natural thing you would have done because we've had to kind of encourage that. Yeah. So
God doesn't do that with you, right? He doesn't encourage you to do the loving thing. The law itself it should be enough encouragement already. You know, the law rewards you for doing a loving thing and does correct you for doing an unloving thing, and that should be enough already for you to determine to do the loving thing versus the unloving. You shouldn't need a person in your face constantly saying you should do this and you should do that, you know. And also an aspect of love is self-responsibility. So if we nurse you, we are teaching you not to be self-responsible. That's the opposite of what we're teaching. We're trying to teach you to be self-responsible. If you love yourself, you will be self-responsible for your life. So when you need assistance, you will ask. When you feel you're going well yourself, you will do as much as you possibly can yourself. When you need God's help, you will ask. But God will often say to you, well, you can do it yourself. So I don't need to do that for you. You know? So when it comes to many of you providing for your own life and so forth, you can't expect God to rescue you from your lack of desire to look after yourself. Right? So these are just principles that we're trying to teach regarding love that affect our day-to-day life. And it's interesting because there's so many people who want us to do more than that. You know, they want us to nurse them and they want us to listen to them and they want us to listen to their problems as if their problems are unique. You know, in 2,000 years, we've met a lot of people, and in that time, we know that almost every one of your problems somebody else has. Right? So your issues are not unique, you're not special in any way, you're equal to every other person, including to us. And so we don't feel that our role in life is to be your mediator between God and you. You know, we want you to have the relationship direct with God, which is also, by the way, what God wants. And he feels you are his child and he wants that relationship with you to the same extent that he wants it with me. Right? The key is going to be how much do you want it? How much do you want that relationship to develop? Do you even think at the moment that relationship is even real, or even a possibility? Well, if not, then work through why you feel that way. God wants you to make choices and decisions. He wants you to be self-determining in your own life. And so anytime Mary and I interfered with that, we would be unloving to you.
Whereas when we talk to you about it after the fact, that's more educational. That's more showing, okay, this is what you did with your free will choices. Let's talk about the issues of love involved. So we haven't tried to manipulate your free will choices, but we are going to respond in a loving way to what's happened. So if you watch us, you will see we do that in everything that in all of our interactions with people. We don't intervene. We just help people to try and understand the principles we're teaching in a practical sense by when they seek us out by talking about the principles involved and how they apply to their life.
Yeah. Now there's times when we are personally responsible for a space. So like this seminar here, we're personally responsible for this space. So if one of you got unruly, we would ask you to leave. If we feel you're doing the wrong thing, we will ask you to leave because that's our responsibility. And also bearing in mind this is our space because we've created this space in order to learn, and we want to make sure the space is able to be used in a learning capacity.
But see, I see that as the same thing. That's
Correct.
you. If I stood up here at the beginning and said, right, you guys, if you do this and if you do that and if you do this, then you're going to be tossed out, and gave you the hard word and shamed you and, you know, mummied you or threatened you, then I'm trying to manipulate your will. But if I make it open, and if you are disrespectful,
when we ask you to leave, then that's now you've exercised your free will and we've exercised ours.
Yeah. And also it's a teaching moment if the person is open.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it feels so good to be taken care of.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So,
We're also codependent.
Stephen, you need to use it like that.
Yeah.
So Stephen said it feels so good to be taken care of, but the reality is you don't actually learn much about yourself when somebody's taking care of you all the time. You don't end up having a lot of confidence in your own abilities when somebody's taking care of you all the time.
It's actually, I agree that everybody wants that, but it's actually
Undermining your own love of self, actually.
Your love of self, your sense of confidence in your own capacity to deal with issues in your life, your understanding of your free will that God has gifted you with, the power of that will.
So in answer to the statement, if you feel it's good, there's the addiction.
Well, it goes back to what you're saying.
Well,
yesterday about
microphone
comfort,
against
right?
Steve,
We're all seeking-
microphone, you're not.
Oh. Yeah, it goes back to what you were saying yesterday about seeking comfort. And we're looking for comfort in our lives, and when other people take care of us, that feels very comfortable.
But there's a false faith.
Well, it's an addiction, I'm saying.
But no, it's worse than that. There's a false belief that's saying it's comfortable when someone else looks after you. What I find is it's not comfortable.
Yeah,
No, ultimately it never is. Yes,
No.
but it,
No,
it
and
feels
as you
really good.
grow, it'll feel adversive. You'll feel like.
I was making kind of a joke there.
I know, but it's interesting even, a lot of our jokes do display the underlying feeling we have, right?
Yeah.
I remember Michael in Canada made a joke about, Mary was talking about women nursing men, and Michael said, yes, give me more of that. And it's a joke, but it's like, but at the end of the day, it's like, no, there's the addiction, like, and you're not understanding sometimes how severe that addiction is influencing your relationship with God. How the extent of the impact, which is quite often quite extreme. So the whole idea that sin brings comfort is a flawed spiritual belief from the beginning. Sin brings pain and suffering, not comfort. And so when we feel that it brings comfort, we are already in a flaw. We already have a flaw. And it's one of our most severe flaws. Because the reality is God created laws that say when you sin, there will be pain and suffering. And we're saying, no, that's not true. We're saying, no, if I sin, I get my addictions met, then it'll bring me pleasure, is what we think. So
Most people think it's the only source of pleasure.
the only pleasure they have.
Yeah, that's the allurement, isn't it?
That's-
It feels really good at the beginning, but then, man, you pay for it.
Correct. The allurement is, it looks all glossy on the outside, and this is something we notice here, particularly on the West Coast here, right? Everything's like very much focused on the image, the glossiness. You know, we drove up in, I don't know how old our car is, Shank, but it must be
90-something,
1999.
99, so it's a 25-year-old car we're driving up here to park outside, and
the valet.
your valet even thinks, yeah, you know, these people are not worth as much. But they don't know.
There's no tip here for me.
Yeah. And then when we pointed out, actually, we're running the event, it's sort of like, okay. You know, it's sort of like, okay, you know, now things have changed, but it was all about the facade, see? And there is a huge addiction in the Western world in particular to facade, isn't there? And so the allurement, which is really the facade, which is like a lure, it's like a fish on the lure, isn't it? When you think about a lure with a fish, you know, they're all bright and shiny, but when you bite on it, you find it's not another fish. You know, the fish finds it's not a fish, and now it's hooked. And it's going to find it difficult to get off, right? And it's very much the same with our sin. It's sort of like, the sin is like the lure enticing us, and we grab onto it only to realise that it's not even real. That it's actually a facade, it's not even real.
Some of us hang on for quite a long
Yeah.
time before we
But we
realise
stay
that.
hooked,
Yeah.
and then when you try to get yourself unhooked, like, you know how hard that is, right? It's very hard to get yourself unhooked once you're hooked to a sin. And so you've been dragged along now in your pain and suffering, but still don't want to let go of the sin. And this is where the majority of people are on earth. They don't want to let go of their sin, even though many times they know it's now painful to stay there. Yeah, so that's difficult. Time.
I have a question about the main qualities and principles that you focus on.
Yeah.
Is that now be a good time, or?
Well, I'm thinking that maybe what we need to do is just have a toilet break now, shall we? And then if I can go to around about 1:30, and I just want to present some fundamental truths about God, as we discussed we were going to do yesterday. And then we can have lunch, and then we can maybe have a bit of discussion about that, and also hopefully maybe talk to some spirits about that as well. So can we do that? Yeah. So let's have a short break.
Sites with God's Way if you want to follow events, if you want to register, Mary.DivineTruth if you want to keep up with us. There's also donate.divinetruth.com, which lists all the donation options that people have. Someone was just asking about it in the break. I know some people like to do recurring donations. We do have a Canadian bank account, we have a US bank account, we have a Great Britain bank account, and we also have a bank account in euros as well. So if your bank offers you to do recurring payments from your personal bank account, you can usually set that up from your personal bank into our bank account, which has the same currency as your own. But obviously we're not in your country, so it's hard for us to say that for sure. Some banks have different rules. There's also, we think, the facility within WISE, which is the service we use for international transfers ourselves. It used to be called TransferWise, is now just called WISE. And there should be, if you set up your own account in WISE, there should be the facility to set up a recurring payment from your WISE account to our WISE account. And Jesus was just mentioning that he thinks that now we do have a pay by credit card option, and you can set it up for a monthly payment annually. So
yeah, I don't think it will go more than 1 year, something like that.
Yeah. So just because someone asked about recurring payments, that's what we know. Yeah. If you have issues, let me know. If you have successes, let me know, because then I can pass that information on to others. Because obviously not having bank accounts in your different regions, we don't always know how these things that are promised work, if they work. Yeah.
And your banking system here is pretty much all privatised, is that not true?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in Australia there's a lot more regulation than there is here about banks and everything. So sometimes we don't know what you can do versus what we can do. But the other thing we must say too is that it's just got I'm not very interested in money.
No.
Aside from the fact that it lets us visit you. But yeah, I can't remember that, so I'd have to...
Was it about donations?
It was about donations, but I missed...
Something I didn't do earlier was acknowledge the people in Australia who actually donated towards this trip.
Yeah.
They helped to get this off the ground, really, and so we do appreciate that. A lot of them feel a lot of, they feel affection for you and love for you and want you to be able to meet us, which is just a lovely sentiment.
Yeah.
They want you to meet us as much as hear what we have to say.
Tell them thank you for us.
Yeah.
We've already thanked them.
They've been sending their love to you, and I know that a lot of the groups we've visited so far have asked us to pass their love forward to
to you guys too. Yeah. Obviously we've met quite a few hundred people now, so.
Yeah. I'm just going to run to the back here and shut the door. So you.
No worries. Okay, let's focus on beliefs matter, about peace, about God. First thing I want to do is talk to you about some fundamental beliefs about God. Many of you will sort of think you know this, but it's interesting how it affects you emotionally when you haven't processed through things emotionally. So a lot of people don't realise that even though they think they know in their mind things about God, that they now have come to the conclusion are true, when it comes to their emotions, they still really feel the same old way they used to feel about those things. And this is problem that many of us face is that we've not released the false belief emotionally, and that causes us to continue to emotionally believe it and continue to emotionally act in harmony with that belief, even though in our intellect we think we've solved the problem. Does that make sense to you? So if we look at the different beliefs about God around the world, in your country, the Christian faith is pretty dominant, isn't it? And so you could say the belief about God being a triune God or a Trinity. In other words, God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, right? Obviously that is false. You know, the Son being myself, I am not God, never will be. God is God alone. And the Holy Spirit is an energy of God. It's an active force of God that is used specifically for the transmission of God's love. I'm the person who created that term, so I should know what it means. So the Holy Spirit is really an energy that comes from God specifically to respond to the human sincere desire to receive God's love. Right? And it's not always active in history even. There was a time from a man and a man, the first human couple, who you would know as Adam and Eve, right the way down to the 1st century. There was a time when the Holy Spirit was not active on earth at all. Right? So it's an energy that God uses specifically for the distribution of God's love to his children, of which you are, right? So truth is, the Trinity, the whole idea that there are three in one, obviously false. Right? When I say obviously it's not that obvious because many Christians believe it, right? And have done for many centuries. Since about the 3rd century CE, Christians came up with this sort of concept and diluted my teachings in the 1st century about God and by using this concept. And also, unfortunately, when it comes to how they view me, you can see with a lot of Christian faiths, particularly the more Pentecostal or fundamental types, they talk about Jesus and having a relationship with Jesus and all this kind of stuff all the time. Honestly, I'm just a human. Just like you are human. I can't manage all of you. I can't. God is the person who's your father, your creator, and God is the person capable of managing all of you and managing all the laws that govern you. And so I actually feel whenever energy is given to me in that regard, it feels quite blasphemous towards God, actually. So for that reason, I'm often quite, when people, try to, there's a difference between honour and respect, isn't there, and actual worship, right? And when people project their worshipful feelings towards myself, I don't receive any of them. It's wrong to do so. Yep. So that's the Christian view. That's, you can say, one. And we might just put in there brackets, Christian. Now that's not all Christians, actually. There are some Christians who do believe that I'm a human, so this is number 2. There's some Christians, Christian churches, ones that come to mind, I think the Christadelphian faith, the Jehovah's Witness faith, and a few other faiths that are called minority Christian faiths. They do believe in God, and they do believe that the Holy Spirit is God's active force, the Spirit. They do believe I'm a human, but they still believe that I was sacrificed for their sins. No one can sacrifice for your sins. It's a fundamental truth. You are responsible for your own sins. Right? No one else can ever take responsibility for it. And also, if you think about it, it would be very unloving for God to force a person, such as myself, to take responsibility for your sins. wouldn't it? It's like getting two children and saying, here's one child who sins, and here's the other child who's being sinless, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to make him die to pay for the one who was a sinner. Now, would that feel very, like, fundamentally just to the person who's already sinless? No. So the whole concept, of course, so this is just, it's a sort of an additional concept where the Son, being Jesus, died for our sins. False belief. It's interesting how many of you still want this to be true, though. And it gets projected at me all the time, even when we're doing seminars. People want me to compensate and want me to sort of help you with your sins, that your sins are your responsibility. Now, if I desire to teach you about sin and so forth, well, that's my desire, but I don't have to. That's not my role in life. Right? I don't have to do any of that. I desire to do it because I love you and care about you, but I don't have to do it. I don't have to even talk to you about any of your sins at all. If I chose not to, I could just ignore all of your sins altogether, right? If I wanted to. You follow? So there is nothing at all that says that I am responsible for your sin, or that I'm going to die for your sin, or that I'm going to do anything about your sins ever. Right? Personal responsibility says you're responsible for it. Right? And God will require that responsibility for your actions. So, false belief about God punishing one child for the sake of all of his others, all of his other children. God does not do that. So whenever you're a parent and you've got 3 children and you're saying who did the wrong thing, you don't know, and then you decide to punish all of them, you know, that's a common sort of thought, isn't it? At schools and everything, I'm going to punish the whole class because somebody did this and nobody's owning up, so I'm going to punish the whole class. It's so unjust to do such things. It's obviously wrong. Come up with another way of dealing with the problem. Okay, so that's the fundamental Christian belief about God. If we look at the Muslim belief about God, let's look at that. What is Muslim belief about God? There is one God, but the character of God, similar to the character of God in the Christian faith, is very distorted towards punishment and reward. You follow me? So they say there's one God, but they call Allah, but actually Allah.
That's the word for God.
Sorry.
I'm sorry. It's the word for God in Arabic.
Yeah.
That's right, but actually Allah is a spirit who connected to Muhammad when he was channeling. So it's really interesting the dynamic of what happened there, because Allah shared spiritual truths with Muhammad on earth. The spirit Allah, not God, shared spiritual truths, but now everybody in the Muslim faith believes that Allah is the word for God, but actually the spirit who came to Muhammad to share the truths that Muhammad wrote down, he was a spirit, he wasn't God. So that's an interesting fact that's worth understanding. Of course, many of my Muslim friends will be offended with me saying such a thing.
Did Muhammad understand that at the time, that it wasn't
No.
God talking to him?
No.
He thought it was God.
He thought it was God.
Okay.
Yeah, and much of what was shared was truthful in the sense of morally sound, but there were certain things that the Spirit said to Muhammad which were not morally sound. Right? And this is the reason why. It's very similar to the Bible, if you think about it. There were certain things, the spirits who channeled material to the Bible writers, by the way, every single one of them was not inspired by God, they were inspired by spirits. So every single book in the Bible is inspired by different spirits. None of them were inspired by God. They were inspired by spirits, and some of those spirits were actively connected to or trying to connect to God at the time. But if you look at particularly the Old Testament, none of them had a personal relationship with God because such a relationship was not possible. So all of the books like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Daniel, Ezekiel, all of those prophetic books of the Bible, every prophecy came from a spirit, not from God. Right? And in the New Testament, 4 of those books were meant to be a record of our life, which they, by the way, partially are, and to a large extent are not. A lot of the books have been modified over years and years and centuries of modification. Look, people modify what I say even now while I'm alive. Don't you think it would have happened as soon as I died? Of course. Now, I didn't write anything in the first century either, and in fact many of my friends from the first century didn't either. Mary did write some things, there were a few other writers like Luke wrote some things. Luke spent most of his life with Mary after I died. When I say most of his life, by the time he was in his 20s, he found Sarah, our daughter, and they're soulmates, and so he married her. They lived together, but they lived with Mary in the south of France, and Mary used to channel me mostly. And Luke used to write things down, and those letters that he wrote got shared all over the earth in different ways. But most of them have been destroyed, and most of them are not recorded to this day. They died a natural death of most of the things that back then within 100 years. And so the history is, while the Muslim belief of being one God is true, right? But the character of God that the Christian and Muslim faith believe in is false. In other words, God's not a punishing God. He's not a God that's going to destroy the wicked. He's not going to, cause some apocalyptic end to the world, right? God doesn't do these things. He creates things to last. He doesn't create them to destroy them. He's not going to destroy the wicked because he wants to redeem the wicked. Does that make sense? And the laws that he's created have been specifically created to redeem the wicked. Right? They are unbreakable, unmovable, and perfect. And so sooner or later, every person who's ever wicked on earth will be redeemed. Every person. Right? The Lord demands that. Right? So God is perfect. There is also a presumption in both in both religious faiths. They say God is perfect, but then God acts in imperfect ways. so that there's a statement in these religions that God is perfect, but obviously there's a fundamental feeling that that's not true. And in fact, one of the fundamental feelings in most religious faiths that believe in God as an entity believe that God created a flawed humankind. Right? A sinful humankind. Right? Prone to sin. You're not prone to sin. You create it when you want it, but you're not prone to it. And also, God's not responsible for your sin. He's not going to redeem you from it on a personal level, like rub it all out for you without you taking some effort in the process. You are responsible for it. So these religious faiths obviously don't really portray that. There is also the feeling in these religious faiths that if you belong to that faith, you now are a preferred child of God. Does that make sense? So Christian faith believes that. If you belong to the Christian faith, you are preferred because you believe in the blood of Jesus, sacrifice, you're preferred by God. And the Muslim faith believes that if you're a Muslim, of course, you're preferred as well. There is this underlying idea or concept that's there. Now, when I say the underlying idea and concept, a lot of times the holy books don't support the concept, but the concept gets developed anyway. Right? So you've got to bear that in mind as well. Right? Okay, so one God is true. In fact, the Muslim faith has the most truth in it about God being one God than any other faith on earth, actually, which is interesting in itself, right?
The Muslim faith also believes that you were a prophet, not God.
Which I was, yeah, of course. So yes, so the Muslim faith has a number of accuracies in it that are accurate, but unfortunately the character of God is maligned. Right? Just like in the Christian faith, the character of God is maligned. So from God's perspective, a lot of what's contained in the Muslim faith and the Christian faith is blasphemous towards God. Right? And this is something that, and I use the term purposely, because it is blasphemy to believe in something about God that is not a part of God's nature. Right? So these are things we need to bear in mind. Strong words, but necessary. Okay, so let's look at some other faiths. So let's go for some other larger faiths on the planet. You've got the Hindu faith. And many of you have been Hindus, so you know that they believe in many gods. Right? Many gods. And not one universal creator, but many gods. Some of which were responsible for creation, others were responsible for devolution, others were responsible for reincarnation, and there's so many gods that were responsible for many things. The reality is there are historically many religious faiths that did believe in many gods, and the reason why is because these spirits came back to them and shared that they were now, like they felt themselves to be now godlike, the spirits did. And so the people on earth then, when they were writing down their books and so forth, their holy books, they would then write down, "Oh, God appeared to me," not understanding it was a spirit who used to live on earth. And of course, the spirit who lived on earth wasn't that open about saying that either, oftentimes. And so you end up with this sort of false beliefs that come about. Now, of course, that's very similar to Roman philosophy in the time that I lived in the first century. They believed in many gods, just like the Grecian philosophies in the first century believed in many gods. And so the Hindu philosophies are very similar to those philosophies in a lot of ways, where they believe in many gods. And in almost all cases, the many gods were actually people who used to live on earth who are now in the spirit world, and oftentimes not in very good condition yet as well. So you've heard of the god Zeus, yes? Yep. Well, he's in the first sphere. He's a spirit.
Still?
Wow.
Yeah, he's still there. Yeah, he had a very, you could say, debauched life on earth, and as a result of his sin and his desire to continue it, he continued it for many hundreds of years after he, died. He passed on a lot of information to people on earth in the Grecian philosophies and way of life, and also with the Romans too. He did the same, and as a result, he misled a lot of people, which caused him to remain where he was for a long period of time, and he still hasn't corrected that. Right? So, yep.
Jake, also something I noticed with all the faiths you've listed so far is there's a strong belief that God requires and rewards sacrifice.
Yes. The theme of requiring sacrifice is a theme that goes through many religious faiths. Right? It actually comes from a human belief that if you love somebody, you sacrifice for them. Make sense? Yeah. Mike.
Thank you. A couple of questions I wanted to ask.
Yep.
One of the aspects, true Hinduism does have many gods, but in addition, there is one God who comes through every epoch or era to save mankind. That's and they call different forms of God. One thing I never understood was, has God ever incarnated on earth?
No.
No, that's not possible, right?
No. And never will be.
And never will be.
Never will be. Never was, never will be.
Exactly.
Every one of those teachings comes from the idea that what God was trying to do over millennia before I came to earth was to try to develop a religious faith that would be open to the concept that there is one God, and also that humans needed to be saved from their sin. Right? Now, God is not intending to do that for you, but he wants to share the truth with you about how to do it. Right? Now, but in terms of there ever being an incarnation of God on earth, it will never be and will never be. God can't even get to be on earth because God exists outside of the universe. The universe itself had a time when it did not exist, and yet God still did exist. So logically, you can see that the earth can't contain God, and never will be able to. There is never going to be an incarnation of God on earth.
Yeah, and so that was the Dvaita philosophy, which said that, the
Correct.
individual and God were separate. And then there's the whole Advaita philosophy from
Correct.
which Buddhism came, which is that
Correct.
you are God.
Correct. So let's look at that one. Yeah, because there's that other philosophy, isn't it? You could say which is the real nowadays the Buddhism philosophy. Is that how I spell it? Sorry if that's wrong. Double D, isn't it? So Buddhism philosophy, which is basically says I am God.
But there are a lot of Hindus who believe that too, that all you have to do is go in and you will find
And you
God.
become God.
You become God.
Correct. Yeah.
God's
False.
within us, yeah.
Very false. And this is another false belief. And unfortunately, this false belief causes a number of problems, as does this one. So let's look at the many gods philosophy and what problems it causes. If you believe in many gods, you will never enter a personal relationship with the one God. So it's actually fundamentally opposed to receiving God's love. Right? If you believe you are God, it is also fundamentally opposed to receiving God's love, because in believing you're God, you're not seeing God as a separate entity to you that has things that you don't have. So it's a fundamental flaw in terms of perception of God, and it's going to change what you choose to do with your life just because of it. So, my runners have to be a bit more on the go here. You need to probably sit in the aisle in order to do that.
I have a couple of questions, Mark. One of the reason I feel like the many gods approach, many gods belief makes appeal to the audience is that from what you're saying, the sheer magnitude of existence, like imagining 20 or 30 billion people
Yep.
still being somewhere, is just super far-fetched.
Sorry, I'm not following your reasoning side.
It's
Are you following his reasoning?
I think it's about God connecting to that many people. Is that
Yeah.
what you're saying? A
Yeah.
single God, having a single
A
God
single
connect to you.
God, that does God work as a team or
No, it's an entity, an individual.
The time, also the space. The space is humongous and the
God's
time
not
is-
governed by time, He created time.
So God does not have a concept of time.
No.
Okay. And the other one is if God, I think you mentioned God foreknows everything.
Yep, because there's no time where He is. He
So-
can see every time at any point. So when I say that, it doesn't mean that He has preordained any time. Because to do that, He would have to preordain your life, which He doesn't do. There's no predestination for your life. You have no fate, aside from perhaps one destiny, in the sense that you have the choice to either have a relationship with God or not.
Jesus did a great talk on fate and destiny once.
Yeah. So, most people sort of believe in God defining their destiny, like in the sense of personally defining their destiny, making them special, more unique than any other person. No, God personally designed your personality, which is different to your destiny. Your destiny is going to be your choice, not
He
God's.
knows what my choices are going to be.
Well, no. But when you say He knows what your choices are going to be, He knows that you have options. He knows what is going to be the most likely thing you do. But the thing of giving you free will means that He has let you make the decision. Now, because He's not governed by time, He can see the decisions you're going to make in the future as well as the decisions you've made in the past. So in that way, He can then know what decisions you're going to make. But He doesn't force you to make them. He doesn't destine you to make them.
They're not God's decisions.
They're not
your
God's
decisions.
decisions, they're yours. You follow?
So one of the things that I was going for is, based on that, is if John the Apostle died in this life.
Yep.
Then wouldn't it have been loving for God to say, don't go to the earth? Because you're going to die anyway?
Well, because John wanted to.
His choice.
It's John's choice. He wanted to come to earth, just like all the 14 wanted to. We all wanted to. So, and God's, well now we learned how it could be done. And once we reached the union state, we learned how it could be done. So, and we wanted to, so why wouldn't we do it?
And that goes the same with like how you say it's an experiment and you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, it's not that God's got a destiny for all of us to reach union with our soul while we're on earth. You know, that is going to be dependent upon our will. Now, obviously, God felt it was possible, right? And in fact, you know, once we reach the union state, you know it's possible. You can feel from God it is possible, and you can feel from God it is a loving thing to do, but not a loving thing necessarily for everyone, because at the end of the day, if 7 or 8 people souls have tried it, 7 souls have tried it, 14 people, and if there's no result from that, then how is there going to be another heap? There might, you know, what's going to determine whether there's a result from another lot coming back to earth and doing it? So at the end of the day, my feelings, my trust in God is such that I feel it's completely possible and likely, but it's still an experiment from my perspective. Maybe not from God's, but from mine. In the sense that I've got to do things, I've got to make choices, and for me, there's AJ, Alan John Miller's going to have to make some choices. Not Jesus, the soul jam, where, you know, Jesus and Mary soul, which is our unified soul. It doesn't have to make choices. It's already made one by connecting to this body. But now it's connected to this body, I've got to make some choices to get rid of my mind in order for it to be fulfilled. And that's up to me to do.
But can you see, and it's obviously coming from some feelings in yourself side about decisions. A lot of people want to feel like God has made all the decisions. God's calling me to do this.
Yeah.
This is God's will for me.
Yeah.
This is a very also Christian idea that.
It's more of a purpose thing. Like
what is God's purpose
God
in my
doesn't
life,
define
for
your
my
purpose.
life? And these are very common false beliefs about the nature of God and the nature of the human soul. So, yeah.
Your purpose is a choice you will make. You know, and the more strongly connected you get with your personality and your desires, the more likely you're going to make a choice in harmony with love and truth about the personality and desires, what he wants, right? And that's a natural consequence of you enabling you further. But God's not going to force any of that on you, because if he did, you wouldn't have free will anymore, right? So like most people on earth have no idea how passionately God feels about your will, about your free will. He wanted to create beings of free will so that he didn't determine their future for them. They determined their future for themselves. Of course, he made laws that restrict your behaviour because he had to, because if you engage your free will such that you destroyed everybody on earth, there had to be some consequence for that to correct those kind of behaviours, right? So if you create like an atomic weapon or some kind of weapon that affected the earth, that destroyed the entire earth, then of course there must be some consequence for you undertaking such destructive actions that have harmed many billions of other people. And God created that.
So space is infinite?
Sorry?
Space is infinite?
No. God's infinite, space isn't infinite.
So that means at some point your incarnations are going to stop, so that...
Well, it's true that the universe is expanding, but it can expand towards the infinite and still not be infinite. So you could say the universe is very large, and it's getting bigger every moment, right? And it has the capacity to incarnate more and more and more souls at any moment, but it's not infinite. The only thing in the universe that's infinite is God, and God's not even in the universe, he's outside of it, because he created the universe, and if he was in it, that wouldn't be possible, right? Yeah. So that logically you can see there's a lot of flawed beliefs about God in most religious faiths because they haven't taken the logic to its full conclusion. Yeah. And almost everybody I meet on earth who has a philosophical view about God, you know, philosophizing about God, and often is not very logical about their philosophy. Yeah. And many of these philosophies, by the way, came from spirits who were also philosophizing about God for many, many centuries. Way before God had any connection with them, they were philosophizing. Yeah.
So one of the things then becomes, I guess they're kind of unrelated, but when you become at one with God.
Yep. In love.
In love.
Because you're not God now, are you?
Yes.
Yeah, because you're still a separate entity, right? But you have God, a part of God. God's love is a part of God. It's a substance that belongs to God. And when you receive that love to the point of becoming a one with God, it now means that your love that you've received from God is now, you've cleared away all sin, including any sin that relates to your concepts of God, which are the last sins you generally clear away. And then once you've done that, you are now at one with God in terms of how God loves. So
does that mean that you still play by the human rules?
There's laws that govern you still. Your soul, you are a finite soul, right? You've got a finite capacity. You are a creature. And what I mean by a creature is you were created by God. And also, God created a structure, the laws, that govern the creature. So the soul being the creature, not your bodies are appendages to the creature. So my physical body, my spirit body are just appendages to the creature of the combined single soul. You know, the soul has two halves, and so the soul itself, the full soul, is the creature created by God. Right? It's the only self-determining creature. But now we're getting on the subject, not of God, but now we're on the subject of the human soul, which you can see is a fascinating subject. Right, and it is a subject that, you know, I'd love to have days and days and days of seminar about.
I guess the connection to this is that once some Hindus, when they supposedly become enlightened, they lose their clothes, they just roam around naked and everything, because they think that's, you know, clothes are human defined. Yes. And so how does, like, when I can see the point in it, like when you become at one with God, you want to lose some human regulations and rules that are established on earth.
It's not a human regulation though, there's some principles of love involved in you having clothes.
Even in hot weather?
Well, in any weather and also in any circumstance on earth, there's principles of love involved in you wearing clothes. And the reason why is because you've got to be conscious of how other people respond to you. As if you love people, you're conscious of how they respond to you, aside from also being conscious about how you are. So a person who loves another would not force something on another that makes them feel uncomfortable. You understand? So let's say other people on earth are in a state of discomfort about nakedness, right? Then it would, if I'm loving, I would wear clothes. It's not hard for me to wear clothes. It can also be an expression of my personality, right? It's not hard to do. And so if I'm making other people uncomfortable, it's an act of love to improve their comfort.
In this, not in an addictive sense, but in a loving sense.
Yeah.
But
So wearing clothes, in fact, there's clothes, the soul doesn't have clothes in the union state, but it doesn't need it because there's no bodies either. In the body's state, in the half of the soul state, the physical body and the spirit body, and in the spirit world, every spirit body, it wears clothes.
But also, can I just address the spirits wisdom side?
Yeah.
Because there's a bunch of Hindu spirits now, like, hey,
Philosophizing.
They kind of took over midway through.
They
this
took over your
conversation.
questions.
Yeah. And they think that being enlightened is the same as being at one with God. So let's just dispel that.
It's not.
Yeah.
Yeah, the whole concept of enlightenment that is in the Buddhist and Hindu philosophies, and now in the so-called New Age movement, is all completely false. It's not enlightenment in terms of at one with God. It's not that at all. What they're actually talking about is really becoming a perfect natural human, the six-sphere state, which is where all of them are. So they're not in a connection with God at all. They believe themselves to be, which is a very, very different thing. And this is the problem, is how do you convince a person who believes themselves to be God that they're not God? And this is the trouble with our beliefs. This is why they matter so much. If you imbibe a false belief, and many of these people have imbibed these beliefs on earth, so they've imbibed the belief that I would become God or I would be a part of God while they're on earth. And when they reach the six-sphere state, the perfect natural human, they then come to feel that that means that they're now a part of God or God herself or God himself. And as a result of that, trying to convince them that they don't have a relationship with God and that's not the same as what we're talking about is very difficult. Now, I've had thousands of years' experience trying to talk to many of these spirits, and it's only by referring them back to their teachings of their earth life, in many cases, that we can actually break down the emotional reasons why they wish to believe such things, which are false. And these things that are false prevent them from having a relationship with God, the entity that's not themselves, completely separate to themselves, their creator. It prevents them from having a relationship with their creator. That's why these beliefs are so important, because they're actually changing people's potential of being able to even have a relationship with God. So maybe what we can talk to these spirits, you know, as a part of this, and we will try, but you'll find them highly intellectual. You'll find them like they've had thousands of years of philosophy that they now believe in almost totally. And then on top of that, they have never progressed beyond the sixth sphere, and they do believe that the sixth sphere is the pinnacle of their progression.
Some of these spirits aren't in the sixth sphere.
Not even in the sixth sphere. Many are in lower spheres and they're being taught by spirits in a higher sphere. Does that make sense? That is the pinnacle of their progression. So when a spirit in a higher sphere comes to the lower sphere and he believes in the, say, Hindu or Buddhist faith, he's saying, he's basically saying, I'm an enlightened being. And everybody who hears them on earth and in the spirit world goes, yes, they are, because they're in a better state than I am. So they must be. And so they presume then that that's the way to become at one with God, which it isn't. Right? There's a whole lot of presumptions that occur when you have false beliefs. And these presumptions occur to support the false belief. Right, so
interesting. I've never had resistance to this because I've never identified myself as a Hindu, but when you're saying those things, I can feel the resistance.
Correct. So
that's
you say
it's not
you.
That's
yeah, it's not you.
They got very bossy with you.
They got very bossy with
yeah.
you, and they're asking now questions through you.
Yeah.
But not just asking questions, they're insisting, no, that's not right, that's not right. And in fact, many spirits, when we start talking about these fundamental truths, many spirits enter sort of like a more panicked state. That what if their beliefs that they've established within themselves and they've acted upon now for thousands of years, what if they're wrong? Now that's a huge thing, isn't it? If you imagine you have selected a belief system that led you to where you are now in a place of perfect natural human. So it got you to where you are now. And what if somebody comes along like myself and says, actually, that state is not your complete potential state that you could have. But actually you could have this other potential state that's not the same as that state. Now, the average spirit confronted with that information, who's in the sixth sphere, feels a sense of panic and sometimes loss even. Like, why didn't anybody tell me? Is also something that they often ask. And we'll maybe have that in this channeling, we'll do. But Mary and I have spoken, obviously in the spirit world and also from Earth here now in this life, to many of these spirits. And many of them enter these states of panic, which they then put on the person they're connected to. And they busy your mind with what if, but what if this, but what if that, and you can understand the panic, given the fact that for hundreds of years and many thousands of years, some of them, tens of thousands of years, some of them, they have believed this thing that got them to the point where they are now. Now, there are some spirits in the sixth sphere who do believe in reincarnation still. And they actually believe that unless they reincarnate, they're not going to go beyond the sixth sphere. That's also false. Right? Any person can go beyond the sixth sphere into the seventh sphere, but it can only be done one way. And that way is to receive love from God, who is an entity outside of yourself. That's the only way. There's no other way. Yeah, pass it back.
Jesus, since the 14 have come back into
Yep.
the 60-some years, haven't other people reached the state? Are they coming to, or maybe for different reasons, and could that help?
There's no point. The only point for coming back would be to help humanity, and other than that, there's no real personal point for doing it. So it's possible for them to do it if they reach that state. Now, I'm not convinced at the moment, and I'm not connected enough to our soul to answer the question as to how many others are in that state. But at this stage, the feeling I have is no others are yet there. Anyway, but if they were, then surely you'd wait to see how this experiment goes before you try one of your own. Do you know what I mean? From a logical perspective. You would go, well, 7 have already tried it, 7 souls, 14 people have already tried it. See how that goes. We'll let that pan out. Let it pan out. It's going to take probably 100 to 150 years to pan out, depending on how long we live. If I only live for another 30 or 40 years, if I'm very unfortunate, then it might be 40 years. But if we do connect to our soul, then it's highly likely we'll be able to live as long as we wish on Earth. And if that is how it works, then there's no need for anybody else to come. So everything that people do in harmony with God is economical. There's no good trying to do something. It's like reinventing a wheel. You don't reinvent a wheel, the wheel works. You follow me? The wheel works as a mechanical device. So the same applies to people coming back. A group of people come back, see how the experiment goes. If the experiment goes well, no need for anybody else to come back. No point to it. And a lot of people go, but they're missing out on life on Earth. And I go, what are you thinking? Honestly, life on Earth is a tiny subset of the potential life you will have in the spirit world, even as a perfect human, without being God involved. The life in the spirit world, you talk to any spirit logically, and the only desire spirits have to come back is because they think they have to come back to progress. But if you say you don't have to, the average spirit goes, fantastic! That means I don't have to go back to that terrible place in order to progress some more. Do you follow me? Mm-hmm. Now, the Earth is only a terrible place because of the sin we have on it. Right? So that's another thing we need to bear in mind. Obviously, if there was no sin here, the Earth wouldn't be such a terrible place. It would be lovely. The first human couple lived around about the 900-year mark, a bit over, and they enjoyed, for the most part, not all of that life, because by the end of it they got old and sick and frail, of course, and that's why they died. But for a lot of that life they enjoyed. But on Earth, there wasn't a lot of other people on Earth, of course, at the time, just their own children. But, they enjoyed that life to a degree. So when you talk to Ammon and a man, they probably are the only people who enjoyed the life on earth the most, actually. But even then, there were limits that they had. And when they look at their life in the spirit world versus their life on earth, their life in the spirit world is far better. So they'd never consider coming back. Yeah. The capacity of the brain is better, the spirit body's mind is far more developed than the physical body's brain, and particularly the physical body brain in the condition of sin is in a pretty bad place, actually. And you know, like that's why our physical body brain only fires its synapses in about 10% of its area, because it's in such a condition of sin that it can't, the whole brain can't work anymore. And so there's this whole areas where when you're a spirit and you've got your functioning mind and in your spirit body, you go, why would I want my physical body back? There's no point to it, except if I need to come back for progression. And this is where the theories of reincarnation began. They got to the stage where they can't progress anymore, right? And then they're worried about that. And they go, well, maybe we need to revisit Earth to learn why we don't progress anymore. You don't have to, of course, but that's what they thought. And up until God's sharing love again in the 1st century, no spirit could progress above the 6th sphere of the spirit world, ever. Right? That was only possible by people receiving God's love in their soul. And God's love wasn't available. So when I say wasn't available, nobody even thought to even ask for it because of their beliefs. You know, the beliefs matter so much that nobody even thinks that they could ask for something. You know? And that's part of the issue that we face on earth, is that when we establish beliefs, it actually causes us to be very limited in what we think are our possibilities.
Thank you. So the 14 came back for love.
Yep. To share truth with people on earth. That was the only purpose. It wasn't for personal progression's sake. That makes sense? Because personal progression is available to you whether you come back or not. So the only point for coming back is to hopefully have an effect on earth. Now, you can see I'm 61 now, I've been doing this for 28 years, and we're not having such a big effect just yet. Yeah? But once one of us becomes at one with our soul, the potential of there being a large effect is very great. Right? So things could shift within months on Earth after that event. Does that make sense to you? Yeah.
Yes.
But if one of us doesn't, then of course the shift will have to come about from each person's individual acceptance of that truth. Yeah.
Thank you.
You were talking about, the spirits, and how they would be in a state of panic.
Yeah.
But they also have access to some knowledge.
They do.
Because the very fact that there's life after death, certain beliefs have to fall off. Like if they were agnostic or atheistic. Now some beliefs would have to fall off immediately.
Well, the atheistic, ironically, belief doesn't have to fall off to become a perfect natural human. And nor does agnosticism either.
You can enter the spirit world and still not believe in God.
Yeah.
You just now believe in the
You now believe you have a spirit body. Yeah. The only real fact that gets established when you die is that you don't die.
Yeah. So that
you have a spirit body.
Has to go.
And that you had a physical one and that's gone and you can see it's gone, so obviously you're not connected to it anymore, but you substantially would know, oh, well, I must have been a spirit all along. Yeah. And I just didn't know it.
Even then, we have talked to spirits who haven't even understood that they've died. So they haven't yet even understood that they're a spirit. Yeah. They're in a spirit body.
It's very common.
But yeah, just because you enter the spirit world doesn't mean you believe in God.
No. So don't presume that. And there are in the sixth sphere, there are many beliefs about God. In fact, there are modifications of every one of these beliefs that exist in the sixth sphere. And there's whole groups of people, literally billions of people in groups of people having a life, basically they live in a culture that's expanded. And they basically have the same underlying belief, many of them, as they had on Earth. And that's why your beliefs are so limiting, because you end up imbibing a belief on earth, and then the only beliefs you change are the ones you're forced into change. And the rest that you think are not, you're being forced to change, the law forcing you to change a belief, then you change your belief. But if the law doesn't force you to change your belief, then you don't change your belief. And ironically, there's no law that actually says you must believe in God. Which actually is good when you think about it, because it means that God gave you free will to even believe in God or not. Right? So there's no law that's going to force you to believe in the one universal God. It is something you're going to have to come to accept if you want to have a relationship with that God. That makes sense? Yeah. So, and also let's address the panic issue. One of the things that most spirits become very panicked about in the sixth sphere of the spirit world is they realise they are not progressing. They're not progressing to another sphere. They're stuck in the sixth sphere. So every perfect natural human is going to get stuck in the sixth sphere while they remain a human. And if they don't receive love from God, they will remain in that state. And what happens over time is they start realising that one of the laws of nature that they are observing, so at this stage they're not thinking about God's laws, but probably the nature laws. One of the laws of nature they observe is that change is inevitable. And here they are not changing. They then become aware that they're not immortal. There is a possibility that their spirit body and potentially their soul may die. Understand? It might take hundreds of thousands of years, but there is a possibility that it might die. Most humans do not know the intention of God when it comes to how long God designed the human soul to survive. Right? And because the human soul is a creature of God, it's governed by the laws of God. And most people don't understand that those laws that require a change. What happens to a soul that doesn't change? There's whole universities in the sixth sphere of the spirit world looking at this problem. What happens if the soul doesn't change? It's a major point of interest in the sixth sphere of the spirit world, particularly amongst spirits who have been there for tens of thousands of years. Because they know they're not substantially changing. They know they're just sort of moving sideways. They're having new experiences by doing new things, but they're not actually growing anymore. And then they worry about this and they go, well, what happens? What was the purpose of my existence? I'm now not growing anymore, and all the way up until now I did grow, but now I'm not. What's going to happen to me? So there is a growing concern in the sixth sphere of the spirit world about what's going to happen to those people who do not make progression to the seventh sphere. They don't even realise there is a seventh sphere, most of these spirits. But they know they're not making progression. And they worry about it. And they go, what do we do? So they come up with philosophies. One philosophy they come up with was reincarnation. Maybe we have to go back to Earth and learn some new things and then we'll progress. Maybe that's the concept. But it's only a concept, the philosophy. It's not a reality. And then there's a lot of them who have tried to come back to Earth and can't, because it is impossible actually to reincarnate. So they've tried to come back and can't. And then what do? So they try that philosophy and they go, maybe I've got to try harder. So they try harder to do that, and they do all sorts of things. And sometimes they even do sins, which causes their degradation of their condition back to the fifth or fourth or third sphere. And then they realise, that's no good either. I've got to stop all that and go back to where I was. But that's a part of the experiment that many humans are engaging in the sixth sphere. Maybe I've got to come back. And then many in the sixth sphere have come to realise that they can't come back. So how do they progress now? And so many of them they come up, there's whole universities that are just in the investigation of what they call soul phenomena in order to try to work out a way that they can progress beyond the sixth sphere, because they know that if they don't progress beyond the sixth sphere, there is a possibility their soul may die. Their soul may die. They don't know that for sure, but they're concerned. And as a result of that concern, they investigate and come up with many philosophies. And I've heard like thousands of them, different philosophies. Mary and I visit the sixth sphere regularly to help people in the sixth sphere. There's a university actually that we teach in that's just created for the purpose of helping the sixth sphere spirits investigate the possibility of a single God, and also what that means to their condition. And there's many of our spirit friends who visit that place very frequently to help spirits progress. But it's interesting when you try to talk to them because they're so intellectually bound, similar to how you were, John. Where's John? Yeah, similar to how you were yesterday, so intellectually bound in their philosophising that they couldn't get out of it into their emotions, to feel about these matters. And it's just really difficult for them to try to even converse with them. In fact, we've had more success, Mary and I have had more success with sixth sphere spirits since we've been on Earth than probably we had the entire time we were in the spirit world for 2,000 years. Yeah.
Yes. Just a follow-up question.
Yeah, if we have the mic. Yeah, speak. Yeah.
So, does the spirit know which sphere it is in? Is it,
Well, no. Many spirits in the first sphere do not know that that's where they are, and many even in the second don't know that's where they are. By the time you reach the third, though, the majority do understand that they're now there. So, but in the first sphere, there's many spirits who believe themselves to be enlightened and are still in the helps even. Yeah. Just like there's many people on Earth who feel they're enlightened, but they're still in the hells. Yeah.
And when you cross the sphere boundary, is it apparent?
Is it
clear to you that you have crossed into a new sphere?
Not always. The sphere boundaries are interstellar boundaries that have gateways. There's gates in every interstellar boundary. You could basically fundamentally view them. I don't know if I want to get too much into technicalities.
No, I think we can say that a spirit knows that a transition has happened.
Yes.
Whether they fully understand the full impact of that or what, they do understand there's a transition that's happened.
And that they have transisted an interstellar boundary that now put them in a new location. Generally, they know that.
But some spirits in the first sphere, as they progress, and in the second sphere, and even some other spheres, they think that they're moving through spheres when they're just moving within the sphere because their environment changes.
Yeah.
And so they think, they've heard about spheres or something similar, and they think, I'm in the second one, I'm in the third one.
So let's say your environment changes 10 times. That can happen in the first sphere. Your environment can change 10 times, where you make 10 literal shifts in your soul condition and your environment changes and you have an improved environment. Many of them then believe they're in the 10th sphere. And they're still in the first. Makes sense?
Again, it's the spirits are
Driving
motivating
the question.
your question.
Which is good,
It's
because
great.
we can talk to them.
Yeah.
So, can you feel at the moment there's a lot more spirit interest in our discussion now?
Yes.
Can you feel that?
And to some of you feel a bit squirmy and some of you feel a bit, it's like, what's happening?
Now the reason why there's a lot more spirit interest is because now I'm talking about subjects that are what they feel are beyond what normally gets discussed on Earth. And it is true, these things barely get discussed on Earth.
Like sometimes we visit spiritualist churches, where spirits know, people are going to channel us because this is what these people do in this church. And very often it's frustrating for them. We go and we can feel their frustration because no one's ever talking about things that they've got questions about, like, where am I? How do I know where I am? What happens? Is reincarnation real? Is this all there is? All these things they have questions about, but all the people who are at the church are interested in is, tell me the message from Granny, and it's all very serving the addictions of the people on Earth. So when we talk about these things, it feels a bit strange for you guys because spirits who've been here all weekend and they're like, okay.
Now we're on the right side.
But a number of groups here at the moment are not very developed in love. They're panicking, they're worrying, they're pressuring you. They're like, and some of your spirits are having reactions to some of the Hindu-based spirits. Some of your spirits are like, oh, I don't know if we like these guys, because they've got their prejudices and different things going on. And that's why it starts to feel, you go through different feelings as you're sitting here, because they're projecting feelings through you onto other spirits with you, and so it's good to be.
Now we're not talking about God at all.
No, that's right. Yeah.
But can you see it's good to illustrate how the belief systems, just because you pass, it doesn't mean any of your belief systems substantially change. Right?
You can have as many questions.
If you believe you're already at one with God, or you're already receiving God's love, and you aren't, but you believe you are, you'll pass with that belief. You will. There's many people who have been taught principles of divine truth while on earth. Many of our friends from the first century, actually, they never received love from God on earth, but they did receive love and compassion from a spirit, and they then believed themselves to be developed, and then when they passed, they found themselves in the hell, and they were in total confusion. Even though they'd heard everything I taught for the time that I taught it on earth in the first century, they still entered a state of confusion because their underlying beliefs that were inside of them emotionally caused them to believe something about themselves that was not true. And this is very, very common. Many of you are going to experience this. Some of you shortly. Yeah. The older you get, obviously, the more shortly it will be. Yeah. And this is the issue we face, is that many of us become so convinced about what we've come to believe, but we're very not open. We're not open at all often to whether that's true or not, right? Or whether it just contains a partial truth, something that needs to be developed further. And so many spirits pass with the same ideas, and many of you are going to pass that way. I'm saying you feel maybe not, but maybe yes. Many of you will pass in these states. And unless you imbibe some of the truth emotionally on earth, that will remain with you for a long time. That's why the beliefs matter, because, if we just ask briefly, spirits with Sai, who came to Sai, and to, what was your name? Earl. How old are they? Let's ask. Just ask John or something.
1,200 years.
Yeah.
They've been in the spirit world, so a bit more than 1,200 years old.
So a bit more than 1,200 years old, and substantially they're still asking these fundamental questions.
Well, some of them weren't asking the questions. It was
Not
this
until the
discussion about God that caused them to ask
Okay.
questions.
Yeah.
And there's also a bunch of Christian spirits here who are still
Still
are
staying.
They're quite panicked.
Panicked
as well.
about, okay, if Jesus didn't die for my sins, then have I still got them?
And why didn't anybody tell
And why
them?
didn't anybody tell
That's
me?
their big questions.
You imagine it's like, I don't know now what's happened to me. Yeah? Tricky,
Yeah.
eh? It's like, you see, while you believe something is true, this is why the beliefs matter so much, because while you believe something is true, you're not going to question it.
Right.
And if you don't question it, and you don't have a seeking attitude like a child when you arrive in the spirit world, and most people don't, because you've had 70 or 80 years on earth, and you get pretty arrogant in your 70 or 80 years generally. And so by the time you arrive, you think you're pretty convinced that what you believe is right or whatever, and so you don't question things. And because you don't question things, you don't have a seeking childlike attitude for truth. You don't have a seeking desire for it, and because of that, you don't attract any more truth either. Right? Because all of your attractions in the spirit world are the result of your desires. Right? And so you end up staying there for many, many years, believing the thing you believed when you imbibed the belief on earth.
And so for the Christian spirits, and maybe we'll talk to some people after the break, but just to illustrate it, you know, these Christian spirits have been talking to me about the fact that, well, if Jesus didn't die for our sins, then they're pretty indignant. What I thought that my whole life on earth. Why didn't anybody tell me that? It guided all of my decisions on earth, and I thought I'd done a good job on earth. But now that you're saying that, it opens up a whole other set of questions. Like, so I thought if Jesus died for my sins, where I enter the spirit world, that's the spirit world. And now if you're saying all these other things about sin, does that mean I can change my location in the spirit world? See, before this, no, they didn't even question that.
No, they just arrived there and said, and this is where I've arrived with the belief I had, and my belief I had was fixed, and I've got into this. Let's say they arrived in the second sphere, or let's say they arrived in the top of the first sphere.
They go, this is
heaven.
Mm.
This is the heaven we were promised. Of course, they don't see Jesus in that heaven. But then they just go, well, maybe is he off doing other things? Which is true. It's exactly what these spirits feel. They don't see God. They've been taught that they sort of be at the right hand of God with Jesus sort of thing. They don't see God, and then they go, well, maybe that belief was mistaken.
Well, they also, these guys feel like, well, it's metaphorical.
You know, that's right.
We're here, it's heaven, it's nice.
It's nice. It's nicer than where we were on earth generally, and then usually after a bit of progression, it is nicer. And earth, like I say, is in the middle of the hills, really. So anything above that feels nicer, right? And so you feel, oh, this is heaven. This is what heaven feels like. Not understanding, no, this is not the heaven I promised to people who listen to the teachings I taught.
Maybe we should talk to them after the break rather than,
but what I'm trying to do as an audience is help you understand how much your beliefs stay with you. And if you don't change them inside of you emotionally, they will stay with you a long time. And for many, they stay for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years.
And they guide your so-called logic. So these guys are like, oh, so we're here, this is heaven, that's now what they're saying is reality because it's based on the belief, and here I am. And then their logic is limited to think maybe there's something beyond this because they think, no, my belief says this is where I go.
This is the heaven I was promised.
It's not just the single belief, it also affects how you use reasoning in any environment, doesn't it?
And in any future decision you make. So they're not making decisions for their future that say, I can change and get to a nicer location because this is the location God's given me. Right? So this is the trouble with these beliefs, is that they constrain your ability to think more laterally and go, maybe what I believe is just not true at all. And maybe what I need to do is just start to ask questions and investigate. See, a person who's quite arrogant in their state of belief does not ask questions. They already think they know what they know. So they're not going to question what they know because they arrogantly already believe they know what they know. And so even just the belief that you know what you think you know is damaging enough. Because if you think that way, you are not going to investigate more truth. Right? And this is a big problem with all of these things. What's the time now? Because we must, at some point we've got to have some lunch, right? So why don't we have some lunch now and come back and we use the afternoon to discuss with some of these spirits what they face, so you get the feel of what it's like when your beliefs are so fixed. Yeah? Quarter past 2.
Yeah, and if you bring the mics up, guys, thank you very much.